21-day lockdown starting from midnight tonight. Motshekga says South Africans can elevate the levels of hope through prayer.
Dear friends, on this eve of the inevitable lockdown, I pray for each one of you, and I ask you to also pray for South Africa and pray for the other parts within our province which are not on lockdown. During this time, we also normally pray for those that will die suddenly and unprepared. I pray that they too may be numbered with the company of the redeemed in heaven. I pray for each one of you. We worship a God of hope. We worship a God who, through Jesus Christ, breaks through darkness and points us into his marvelous light. So let this time of lockdown, which is not shut down from each other through Facebook, through IT, through telephone calls, through praying for one another, but perhaps this is a time for us to go deeper into our relationship, deeper in caring. As we look forward to services that we dearly hold in our hearts, Palm Sunday, Good Friday, Easter, my prayer is you can create an experience of how to celebrate this and share that experience with one another. And in our provincial page, we will share and hopefully find best practice. In the past, we have helped people to be prepared and to be resilient. So let us remember that we love because Christ first loved us. And through that love, we can soak all our nations and God's people in that love, and so elevate or increase the hope that people desperately need to hear about.
All cars passing through the Middelburg toll plaza will be stopped and all passengers screened for COVID-19. The Mpumalanga Health Department says this is to minimize the spread of the virus as people rush home ahead of a 21-day lockdown. Our reporter, Spepile Kunene, was on the N4 to see how health officials were activating the screening process.
We're coming to you from the Middelburg toll plaza along the N4 in Mpumalanga, where traffic is beginning to swell from both directions. That is from the Mpumalanga side towards Gauteng and from Gauteng towards Mpumalanga. Another thing that will happen here is that people will be stopped and screened by the Department of Health in the province in an effort to try and reduce the spread of this virus into both provinces. Now it's going to be people from the N17, N4. N17 has people coming from Eswatini through the Oshuk border post, and N4 has people coming from the Libombo border post from Mozambique. Those will also be tested. The challenge has been that along the borderline, people get to make it out without being screened. Therefore, there's a high possibility of getting through this side with the virus, and then they don't get to practice the safety precautions that have been placed around COVID in the country. And on the other side, cars from Johannesburg through N12 as well as N4 from the Pretoria side will also be stopped. Same tests will be conducted. Those that will be found to have the fever and all the symptoms, and where the interview reveals that they've been in contact with someone who's had COVID-19, necessary measures will be taken to make sure that they get help and they do not continue with their journey. Back to you, studio.
Minister Angie Motshekga is briefing the media in Pretoria. Let's go to that now.
Overnight after the announcement of the lockdown, so parents quickly rush kids out of the province. So it's going to be impossible for us to say we can track children that were feeding, the 9.6 million children that were feeding, and say we can run any feeding during the lockdown. So we want it to be very clear that as much as it's a difficult thing to say, as DBE or as education, we've agreed with MEC, it's mission impossible. We won't be able to do it. So on the reopening of schools, and I want to read this slowly because I find it very upsetting. We are aware that people continue to spread incorrect information. And fake news cause a lot of damage to the work we're doing, especially under the current circumstances. We humbly and strongly, at the same time, urge members of the public to desist from spreading false information about when schools will reopen and on any other matter. That's why I say even teaching, if, as far as possible, if it can be coordinated through us. So there is no truth to what has been circulated on social media about schools reopening in September. So we request the public to ignore any other information which is not communicated officially by DBE and dismiss it with the content it deserves. The truth is that, as MECs in our teleconference this morning, we extensively deliberated on the preparations for the opening of schools after the lockdown is lifted. So the exact dates for the reopening of schools for the start of the second term will be communicated officially later, and it's going to be dependent in the main by how, as South Africans, we carry ourselves during this lockdown. That's what is going to determine whether the curve flattens or it doesn't flatten. So we're going to be guided by the Department of Health to say, indeed, we think we can really lift the lockdown, children can go back to school. So when our children go back to school, it's all in our hands during this period after midnight, that people, as much as possible, we're appealing to them to observe and respect the lockdown. So as the Department of Basic Education, we're finalizing a standard operating procedure for basic education sector to provide guidance to schools and education offices on how to prepare for the opening of schools. The department is in discussion with the National Treasury and all our provinces on the provision of minimum health packages for our schools. Again, we'll provide more details, and that's what we're working on with provinces, and also getting the command centers in provinces to make sure that we can really deal with some of our major challenges around health in our schools. So I'm very grateful to our partners who are extending a hand during these challenging times by making available their physical and financial resources. We welcome commitment of support from partners such as Old Mutual, which has pledged 50 million to support the education program. UNICEF and others have made inquiries in terms of how they can assist us. All education-specific contributions processed by our department, such as materials and platforms, will be registered with the Solidarity Fund established by the President, so that any other pledge, we're channeling it through the Solidarity Fund, including even offers for feeding learners. We've referred those to the Solidarity Fund so that they can be processed through social development, because we'll have no capacity to receive them and even to use them. So the schedule for broadcast of lessons is available on the DBE website as well as on social media platforms. We can tune in to any of the listed radio stations and TV stations to benefit from the programs that have been prepared for the children and their parents or guardians. So the speedy recovery of schools program will be determined by how, as I say, we conduct ourselves as people, because as a sector, we are more likely to have long-lasting implications if the reopening is delayed. The next 3 weeks, I think, for us as a nation, but also as a sector, are crucial for the reopening of schools. And it depends on all of us to flatten the curve of COVID-19, which is rising at a rapid pace daily. So we really appeal on behalf of government that we must please cooperate during the lockdown, stay in our houses and stay safe. Some of our officials will remain available to provide support. Contact us via our social media platform for a speedy response to our questions, with some of us and some of the staff will be full-time working at home to make sure that we can be contacted on any emergency that arises, or if there's any matter that committees don't understand. But in the main, there is no movement that's going to happen in the schools, because we are also in the full lockdown like everybody else. And we will announce when we are able to reopen, guided by health, but also guided by how we conduct ourselves after today's midnight. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you so much, Minister. Colleagues, we can now take questions. Please show by raising your hand so that we are able to identify you, and then you can then proceed to ask your questions. I'm seeing 2 hands right now. I'm going to start there at the back. Please identify yourself and then ask your question, and then I'll come to you.
Good day, it's Sterman from SABC TV News. Minister, you said there is no exact date of reopening of schools, but preparations are underway. Exactly what are these preparations, or what work is currently underway to prepare for the eventual opening? And also, you mentioned that, of course, we'll consider the eventual opening after the lockdown has been lifted, but the danger of the coronavirus will still be there. And we know that often in certain provinces, classrooms are overflowing, schools are congested. So that in itself is a danger. So are you looking in situations like that? Thank you.
All right, thank you for that. I'm seeing another hand on my right.
Thank you very much. I have one question.
Please identify yourself first.
My name is Umamya Ademakele. I'm writing Private Citizen today. I'm from Equal Education. I wanted to know if there are, because you spoke about skeleton staff being left inside the DBE, and I'm wondering if there are places where there's a consideration around safety protocols for school children inside their communities during this time, and if there are something the DBE would take on quite deliberately. The reason we're asking this is because we're wondering who inside the DBE or anywhere else in government is going to be helping with the delivering or dropping off of hard copy materials. How are people going to be able to know how we're going to get a hold of the HODs, as you've spoken about, like a centralized, streamlined approach from the DBE? And how do we ensure that children that are in the peripheries of highly density areas or the rural, peri-rural urban areas are able to still receive the National School Feeding Scheme? And is that responsibility then passed off completely to the DSD? And we'd also like to know if the DBE and provincial departments of education are going to make their websites data-free so that learners can access the resources you speak of.
Okay. There are no other questions, Minister. I'm going to hand over to you, and the DM is here as well to provide support to the Minister and also deal with other questions. Minister, I'm handing over to you.
Yeah, as you said, Chair, we will share the answers with the DM. On the recovery plan is going to be informed by, for instance, the first time when we were working on, just to give you an example on how we were planning the recovery plan, we were calculating that we are going to lose 10 days and what are the implications of losing 10 days, so that the material is to consolidate, to revise and add hours, because you also want to manage that which you can control. So to say you'll ask people to do this and outside the school hours was quite difficult. So we had developed materials, and that's why if you look at the materials we're using was for revision of term 1. Because for term 1 we had lost 2 days. So what is it that we would have lost for closing early? And now we're beginning to lose time on term 2. So how are we going to compensate on the days and the hours we're losing on term 2? So it's based on what our plans are and where we find ourselves at different times. So it will be your enrichment materials. We're going to possibly have longer classes, So enrichment material, that's what we're planning in terms of the recovery plan. And our recovery plan is going to be informed by what we would have lost in days, in times from the plans that we have. If you recall, when we closed schools early, we had said to make up for the 10 days we're going to lose, we're going to extend to take 7 days from the June holidays, 3 days from September. That's part of the recovery, and say we're going to teach longer. But now we're beginning to lose even more than the 10. So what is it that we do then to compensate? So, and that's why we're in constant communication to say, what are we losing which we have to recover? We're losing time, right? But we're also mainly we're losing time. And it's to calculate our recovery in terms of what the plans are. In terms of when are we going to come, what are the health risks, that's what we were discussing with MECs to say, in some centers, it will be like the deconcentration. Most of our schools are crowded in terms of boarding schools. There are more learners close to each other. What plans will we have by the time we reopen? Again, talking about the real world, because we can't, and I can't expect provinces that if we open schools, say for argument's sake, we open in the 16th, they would have created more spaces for deconcentration. But it's one of the factors that we had to look to say, what are the different health protocols in the context we find ourselves, we will be able to realistically put in place. And that's what the discussions are all about. They're not finalized, but it's what we're discussing also as the sector. We had to do an audit of the availability of water, for instance, to say, I had to ask province to say, to give me an audit, which school, whether it's not running water, has no access to water. So if they're using boreholes, are they all fully functional? If it's potable water, are the supplies always there? So we had also to do an audit in terms of the availability of water in the sector. But we have not, and that's what we're engaged. We have not finally finalized the health implications of us reopening at any other time, but opening we have, and that's why we have to look at it. In terms of, there's no skeletal staff. It's lockdown. You see, after 12 midnight, all of us are in houses. No one is moving. We're not distributing anything. There's no one who's distributing. The only people I had asked for permission that they should be allowed, not even this week, from next week, will be people who are working on broadcast, and very few of them. Right? Very few of them. So there's no distribution, and that's why I would say there won't be any feeding. There's no one's going to be feeding, because it means then there's no lockdown. That's when we are asking and working through social development to get committees to step up without feeling insensitive to what the challenges are in the communities. And that's why we're humbly appealing to committees to step up, because from equal education, I always say in December we close for 6 weeks. We close the whole of December, 2 weeks in January. In June, we close for 3 weeks. So we shouldn't underestimate the capacity of communities themselves to be able to carry themselves. We know there's going to be lots of distress, and that's why social development is looking at how families and communities in distress are going to be assisted. But we definitely, and that's why I mentioned in the statement, we feed 9.6 million children every day. There is no way under the lockdown we can pretend that we can do it under lockdown. It's not going to happen. Social development is looking at measures, and they'll speak for themselves, of how they assist communities, because those kids are already in communities and families in distress, but we won't be feeding at all. We won't be distributing any materials at all. And that's why the recovery program is not only focusing on your ICT platforms. We are counting days and hours we're losing, and say, when the schools reopen, how do we make up for them? Are we going to, because we're even obviously having to change our school calendar, right? Is that what we're going to do to save the year? So those are some of the things we're talking about, but anything that gets us to move it, it's not going to happen. Anything that is going to happen is what is going to happen through ICTs. So when we say people must talk to us, they must communicate with us through ICTs. Don't expect that we'll get officials in the office. There won't be officials in the office after midnight today. There won't be anyone. There will be from next week, permission for a few officials who are working on the ICT platforms for limited hours, and safety protocols have been put in place. Anything else, anything moving, there's nothing moving on our side after midnight today. So, Tim, I'm not sure if I left anything out, but really want to emphasize that after midnight, we're not moving.
Minister, I think you have covered everything. Oh. Yeah, I think you have covered everything, except there's this question of free data from basic education. I think Minister mentioned that there's Vodacom virtual classroom that is free for our learners. And the issue of school nutrition for rural, our learners are learners, all of them, whether rural or from townships, because poverty is not only in rural areas, is there and is rife in townships, especially in informal settlements. The way social development is responding when schools are closed, because there are NGOs that work with social development that are feeding the learners, that will still continue. Minister, I think how South Africans collectively respond to the call of the lockdown will determine the spread of the virus. And if we all positively respond as South Africans, we will change. The spread will not be as we suspect that it will grow. It will be minimal, because we have been informed and everyone have been educated how to behave and how to respond to this. So I believe that if we really adhere to all what the President has said and the Department of Health has said, we will win this virus. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Just on the issue of the zero rating, most of the material that the Minister has spoken about is freely available. For example, the Vodacom virtual classroom, it's zero rated, and the content that is there is grade specific. So if you were to go to it, whether you have data or not, it doesn't matter which network you are using, you will be able to access all the content, which is good quality. We've been using it for some time, so it's reliable. If you were to go there, you wouldn't need to access the website of the department. I thought I should just make an addition to that one, Minister. Any other questions, colleague? I'm seeing two hands again, three now. Okay, let me give fresh hands. I'm seeing you then.
Thank you very much. It's Zanda Noble from Newsroom Africa. While it is admirable that you will have all this learning material available online, I think some of the concerns even from parents is how are you going to be assessing, the pupils' ability to grasp the particular content that you're going to put online, because that's exactly the role that's played by teachers to ensure, different pupils have different, learning capabilities. So when we do eventually come out of the lockdown, what preparations are you putting in place for the teachers, but also for the pupils to ensure that, yes, this content was online, but some pupils may not grasp the content the same way as others would.
All right, thanks for that. Sipho?
It's just a clarity question here again. So right now, as we stand, Minister, you do not know when schools are likely to reopen.
All right, thank you. I think there was a third hand.
It's Halbalula Palatila from Jacaranda News. I just want clarity when it comes to the reopening of schools and that decision. Will private schools and independent schools be allowed to pick their own dates, or will they have to go with the dates that the department is taking for public schools?
Thank you for that. Minister, I'm going to hand over to you again.
Yeah, let me take the easy one about the reopening of schools. I really don't know. We were speculating to say if the lockdown finishes on the 16th, this is the likelihood for teaching. But it's going to be determined by the curve, because that's what put us in the lockdown.